special assistant to the general superintendent, assistant superintendent there for multicultural education, as well as I was multicultural education and minority student affairs at SMU, and I taught African American studies there as well. Stayed there until 2010, and then I started my company, Sankofa Education Services, which I'm now engaging in, as well as I'm a minister ordained in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, but I'm the founder of First African Freedom Church, which is here in Dallas, Texas, and Ghana, West Africa. My name is Glover, of course, and so I was able to find my family. Alex Haley, who was one of my mentors, as we all know in the book Roots that he authored. Through him and others, I was able to trace and be encouraged to trace my roots back to Africa, where I've gone and we've established a congregation. So my journey has been a very unique one, and now I'm here in Dallas in the last several years and doing a number of things, having worked with different civil rights activists in the past. And so Mrs. King, Mrs. Parks, and also presently with Mrs. Opal Lee, who is the grandmother of Juneteenth, and we are working with her to try to expand that awareness as well.
Outstanding. So there are about 4 or 5 different things just in your summary introduction that I'd like to delve in. Hopefully, if we have time this evening, how we got introduced to each other and we started having this conversation. Given that we're in the last couple of weeks of December. And we wanted to have someone who could bring an enlightened light of what and how we celebrate the holiday season during this time of the year. Of course, when you think of Christmas, the transition into the new year, there are a couple of different narratives that you typically see. There's the Santa Claus narrative for somebody. There's the commercial Christmas that folks buy into. A lot of folks in our community, we look into, of course, families getting together and celebrating the Christmas holiday, celebrating the birth of Jesus on December the 25th. And then we look at the whole transition from this period of time into the new year. But what I'm looking forward to is getting some of your insight through your research, your experience, your studies, as to what you have seen over the years. And given that you have passed through different generations of high significance, what you have seen and what you can begin to share with us and teach us about this period of time in the year and its significance to our communities in particular.
Well, one of the things I do say is that, now that I reached the mark of 65, it allows me to look back. I'm a Jim Crow survivor, and that simply means that anyone born before 1964 lived under legal segregation in this country where politics and government and social structures were supported. So those of us who lived during that time, who saw these things and lived during these restrictions, were able to experience those moments of history, just like our ancestors who were enslaved, our African ancestors who were enslaved during slavery. No one is living at this time who can tell us that story verbatim. Those of us who are Jim Crow survivors, we can speak to that time of Jim Crow. But also during that time, because I knew my great-grandfather who knew his father and grandfather who were enslaved, and because I knew other people who shared those stories with me, we have what is called secondary resources. A primary resource is a person who you speak to, just like me. I'm a primary source from the Jim Crow era, if you will. I can speak to that era. No one is living who can speak to slavery. However, by me speaking to my great-grandfather and being able to understand what happened and what he knew, we're able to get, not just me, but we're able to get a sense of that. So in history, oral history is very, very, very important. And as a people, we, just as Alex Haley and others, we must put value in that. We call them griots in our culture, the elders, if you will, who are able to, matter of fact, oral history is really older than written history.
Correct.
And so subsequently, you have oral history oftentimes put in the form of songs, coming through the village, singing the songs of the things. So that's very important. And we still do that in African culture. We're very rhythmic with our stories. We have many stories in our songs in our churches. So tonight, as we gather here and look at this season, there are certain things we must also accept. Every culture has its own valued identity. So we have a number of things mixed up in this experience in America. Let's, for an example, indigenous American people, Native Americans, we call it, they have their experiences, their stories, their creation stories, their holy days. And again, it's not holidays, they're actually holy days. The word is holy, not holidays. So we need to play, because we've reduced words so that we just say them comfortably, holidays. So we don't really think about them as truly being holy days, you see, the days that people set aside as holy, if you will. So as we come into this period of time, we're in indigenous places of land of cattle, particularly in Texas and other places, and the Ouachita, the Cheyenne, the Iroquois, and so forth. So then when we think about who we are as African people, and there are many ways of looking at this, because I know there are people who talk about we were here before anybody, with the Olmecs, the Pangea, there are whole different angles we go to it. But I'm going to do the basic element of how we arrived to particularly 1619, if you will. We can go back to Ivan Van Sertima, who was a friend of mine and a mentor in this book. They came before Columbus, the African presence in ancient America. So I can do that, but I'm dealing with a different angle paradigm right now. I'm talking about the 1619, which is recently out, the books that have been written, the articles in the New York Times, who are ancestors that started this movement from indentured servitude into slavery or chattel property in America, under which our ancestors worked. They brought with them their history. That's why I say 'tis the season to be free. So that when we look at this particular time in history where they eventually ended up in slavery prior to the period of cotton, the tobacco, and rice in the northern, ended up in New England states, Thomas Jefferson and others, Monticello, we must first, as an African people, recognize who we are. Today, there's a very popular thing of people saying, because I don't use the word slaves, I always use Africans who were enslaved. And now we're hearing people who are saying enslaved people. Very dangerous. We've objectified enslaved people. Who are the people? So we are a people. And those initial people who came here were from West Africa. And before the mixing on the plantation with the masters, if you will, the owners, if you will, we were basically a dark-skinned, very, very familiar people. For example, I'm more red than I would when I'm in Africa. I see my brothers and sisters who are truly dark, you see, and so forth. Most of us, I can look at you, because we've been mixed, and that's a reality. And so, but the fact that our blood and our melanin and our reality is grounded in our African identity, I advocate that we speak about ourselves as an African people throughout slavery, throughout Jim Crow, and to today. And when we look at the holiday, what we call the holy day of Christmas, very quickly, which was established by Pope Pius, and because we're beginning to look at what happened in that whole biblical message and that story that Rome took and controlled, because this was really the winter solstice. And this is why they placed it on December 25th, because of the winter solstice, and then because of Hanukkah and all these associations. And so that's where the Christmas tree comes from. We see the lights, we see the what? I beg pardon? Well, when I say I don't call them, use the word pagans there. Human beings, because everybody's a human being. And as I said earlier, all human beings have experiences. Europeans have theirs, Romans had theirs, Greeks had theirs, Africans, well, the word Africa, Ethiopians, Nubians, we had ours, Native. So every culture has its own identity, you see. And so, because when I use the word pagan, because in the African American or Afrocentric movement, of which I've been a part of for well over 42 years of my life, we get into back and forth by, just as they call us primitive or this, then we turn around, we call them pagan, then we go back and forth with these terms, and we're trying to basically create a tit for tat, because war is war in the reality of the human experience, be it in Nordic culture, African culture as well. We're warriors. Every group of human beings have men who are warriors, and we are warriors, and we have our own stories in Africa that we can tell too. and we should tell them. We should talk about everything that happened in not only West Africa and the kings, and you have Shungai, Mali, and Ghana, Timbuktu. The men who Tyrek the Great, who went into Spain and conquered Lower Spain. You had Hannibal. So we have our own stories. But yes, the what you speak to is that the traditions that the Pope at this time wanted to appeal to are the people of what they knew and they understood. So we have this season of the winter solstice, just as the Feast of Esther, which is Easter, gives us that period of time, you see. And so the church adapts these days and times, and then eventually, if you're a Christendom or the Christian faith, propagates these, and they begin to impose them, and now they become tradition.
Can I ask a question right quick? So you mentioned, and I'm glad you brought that up, in terms of the winter solstice, the correlation of what we are now celebrating as Christmas, as opposed to its origin. Could you briefly unpack what we are truly celebrating? Because of course, from a Western, if we look at most people looking at it from a Western perspective, they celebrate December 25th as the birth date of Jesus the Christ. But there are a lot of other things, historically speaking, that you talk to very briefly. So can you unpack and or kind of tie the dots in between the date and the why we are celebrating what most of us look up as the birth of Christ, and give us a brief historical narrative on that?
Well, it's a simple way I put it, that the Christian faith exists between two bookends, and those bookends are Christmas and Easter.
Mm-hmm.
And when you, as I did as a child, I believed that these bookends were true. I grew up under this, as we all grew up in the church.
Of course.
That these bookends were true. When you begin to realize that December 25th was not the day that Jesus was born on, when you begin to understand all the rudiments of the Council of Nicaea and what went on in the Council of Trent, all these different things to establish certain doctrines of the church. So the winter solstice, which we are in now, particularly for the northern hemisphere, where you have the sun that goes down, and then you begin to get the long nights, the cold nights, etc., waiting for the birth of the sun, if you will.
Yes, there we go.
The birth of the sun. So here we have this correlation here. Then you have the Feast of Esther, which is Easter, which is the spring equinox. And so we have on this end the symbolisms of the women who would paint their bodies red, blue, yellow, pink, and run into the woods, and men would chase after them, have intercourse, and babies are born. So we have this symbol of eggs during Easter now, that represents the egg of the feminine woman. And then that's associated with the resurrection, if you will. And so now we see that now. Most religions or most traditions are built around some mythological story. They're then wrapped into doctrine, and then for many become reality, without question. As we see generations, as we see how many things have changed over the years. So, an example, as we talk about the word Jesus, for an example, I said some 40 years ago, we're going to be hearing the word Jesus the Christ, because the Christ is not a last name. It is a title. It comes from the word the Messiah. Jesus is not his original name. The name is Yeshua, which is a Y. There's no J in Hebrew. So we have this evolution in time. When we look at the story of African people, who people perceived as not having any faith or spirituality, who actually are descendants of the Hebraic traditions of Israel. You see, of this. Well, one of the things. Well, one of the things I think is everything is a matter of timing. And when I say timing, uh, the the timing that I'm talking about is that what is coming forth in its time. Our African ancestors, although let's go back for an example, even when we talk about the biblical Exodus, research has shown to now that quote unquote slaves did not build this, if you will, these pyramids, that these were skilled men and women. I mean, skilled men, particularly, I'm sorry, who built it. So our concept, but when we look at 400 years of slavery in America, and we look at the journey of our people, and we look at all of these things, we have a profound understanding because we put into it, just like when we sing the word kumbaya. Kumbaya. We've been singing that for years. That's come by Yahweh. Our ancestors knew, but they couldn't speak to it, but they could do it. See, that's what I tell so many people. Our people did it, didn't understand why, and now we get it's a flip. Even like the word hallelujah, as I've said to before. That's the most powerful word in the faith of our tradition as African people. Hallelujah! Pray, hallelujah! All praises to Yah. We're now seeing, we have names all over the continent of Africa that imply the name of Yahweh. Fred Hammond the other day sang a song on, what's his name? It was on television on the young man who has a daytime TV show now, Nick Cannon. He sang a song on Yahweh. It is becoming relevant. It's coming to pass. You see, so what I suggest to you, it is like planting a seed. It's coming to pass. You don't force it. You can't force a seed to grow. It comes in its own. It comes in its own season. You understand? And as I have been telling people in the years, if you believe, if we're talking about men, let's talk about men, black men particularly. One of the things that we as African men, or men of African descent, of Nubian, or whatever name you might want, Agbulan, because I know everybody has a different perspective. But we as men of the continent must understand that we must humble ourselves to the Creator and to the forces around us that our ancestors understood and relate. Because see, in one sense, we get very egotistical about things rather than submitting ourselves. And in a way, in particular, as out of the quote church tradition, as I tell you, I'm not a Christian, but I am a part of the church. I understand that. The Christian faith is a created doctrinal development. The Church of Yeshua the Messiah is a fellowship of believers and men and women who walk in the path of the teachings of the way. We know the Old Testament come out of Musa or Moses. We talk about the negative confessions and ancient Kemet. We know all of that. Those of us who've been studying now, we must help young men and women understand how to practice it, how not to become so bitter in their spirit that they are not able to evolve spiritually and socially, you see.
Let me ask you this, and Jimmy, I'll of course let you follow in afterwards. And I don't believe correlation is the right word, but when we look at the common practice of the celebration of what we now do on December the 25th, it's what we're doing, which has become custom or ritual. And then there is a history that rendered where we are now. So the first question that I have for you is, there's what we're doing. We get together, we travel from all over the country to see family, we eat a lot, we give a bunch of gifts, we sing Christmas carols. You go into every store in America and you're listening to Christmas carol songs, spending money that you don't have, which is counter ethical to what our experience is when it comes to what our African traditions are. And so the question is, what is it that we must reevaluate as we approach this season? Christmas, or what we celebrate as Christmas, is a week from this Saturday. And I'm not saying that we're going to completely flip our practices and our rituals, but where is it that we should be building to and towards for the future, for the next generation? Because to your point, your generation who lived through and know directly from your predecessors, and to a certain degree what you lived through, everybody has a timeline, and we have to pass this torch. Where is it we should be going? What is it that we should be reevaluating during this season? What is it we should be doing differently, or at least considering, as opposed to what we've been doing commercially during this holiday season?
Well, it's just very simple. As I said in my article, that in Essence magazine that interviewed me back in '86, Spirituality and African View, I talked about the fact that as theologians, we had to prepare ourselves for a new generation. And it's fairly simple. I grew up, and people grew up with the white Jesus in the church, in the homes, and this perception of who Michelangelo had perceived as this image became known. Right. Well, yeah, it is again, sir. But let me just go back, if I may. It is there, and you can't take it out for some. This is what I've said over the years. And I've said this to many African Americans. You don't go into your grandmother's house and take her Jesus down. I've had families get into a serious fight over that. If they heard me lecture, they go back and do something. I say, man, your grandmother's going to put you out before she put white Jesus out. Okay? Because we must accept those realities.
Right.
You do not disrespect grandmother.
Right.
You do not disrespect grandfather. And I am very adamant about that tonight. And I see brothers, all particular brothers, getting adamant. You disrespect your elders, and you're in trouble. Their reality is their reality. I have a different reality. We then must, in our homes, either we go out and we establish our spiritual communities where we don't have a white Jesus over the altar or in the baptism pool. Just as we do in Ghana, West Africa, where I tell my members over there and my pastors, which is profound because they have white Jesus everywhere, they have no images. And it creates a tension, but they can go to mama's house, they have one, but when they come to their house, they don't have one. And they can explain why. Because we say that God is a spirit, that Yahshua Messiah, who was a teacher, your rabbi, said God is a spirit, and they who worship God must worship God in spirit and in truth. For no man has seen the form of God. So we must allow that transition. There's always change, but it's transition that is important. How you transition from one stage to the next stage. And this is what I've seen over the 40 years of my life, is that even as I lecture to people, then people run out, read a book, get all, a little bit of knowledge, and go out and begin to try to turn their grandparents and turn their family reunions out. That's wrong. That's simply wrong. What must happen is that as time goes on, if a group of shared individuals find common interest, then you come together and you create that transition. So when people look for that place where there is no white Jesus, they say, I can bring my family here. This is why you don't see many young African Americans going into a traditional church setting, for one. But they need a place and an institution. So I hear a lot of young brothers and 30s and 40 and 50-year-old brothers and sisters saying, I'm not religious. I'm not religious. No, wait a minute. The word religion means a practice. Anything you do over and over again, you're religious. Spirituality, is the essence. So we are both religious and spiritual. But we become so radically responding to what we perceive to be white men. So I tell most brothers and sisters, we suffer from a white man on your mind syndrome. See, a white man on your mind is a white man in your way. I don't spend time thinking about the white man. I don't even spend my time talking very much. You see, that we must spend the time talking about who we are. Yes, what we've gone through, and also the victories that we've achieved and accomplished. So when we speak about this season, which is a part, again, going up, we can talk about the Pope, we can talk about the winter soldiers, the Yuletide, and whatever. I have a tree here. I like the season because it is a dark night. This is a season of long nights. And it would be devastating if we just had nothing but total darkness. You see, in our spirit, we need certain things to help us get through certain periods of time, our melanin, our circadian rhythm, So when we look at those, you get rid of them or you don't. And I tell people, I understand why we have them. I understand what their purposes are. See, so then Malana Karenga comes along and says, well, we need an African, and Kwanzaa is not an African tradition. It is an African-American tradition. It's a word with a double A on it, you see? And so he created it for the purpose of trying to give African what we perceive to be a indigenous, if you will, or an African-centered concept. So when he created Kwanzaa, as I said, he put another A on it and created the Nguzaba, and all the different principles. which for the average African American is very difficult. But what I attempt to do is to say, during this season, that we can transition now because we do it already. We do watch Freedom Night. Most churches we were going to on December 31st, while they are going out drinking, European Americans having
Right.
big parties, many of our congregations still have what are called Watch Freedom Night services,
Correct.
which were waiting for the word of freedom during the time of Frederick Douglass and Lincoln and Harry and all this sort of thing. And that's why I proceeded many years ago to write a book. Again, the F is what are we doing? So I wrote a book just like we have the night before Christmas. So I wrote a children because children mythology is important. What we pass on to our children. So my nieces and nephews grew up on this. Now their children have grown up on this story. You see. So during this season, I opened and said it was a night before freedom went all through the land. Not an African man was sleeping, not even an African woman was sleeping, not even an African man. The children were snug and warm in their beds while visions of freedom rushed through their heads. Older man of best dress and me in my suit had just sat down for a bowl of hot gumbo soup. Then out on the street, I rose to chatter. I was raised from my bed from the table to see what was the matter. And what did my weary eyes would appear but a man named Frederick Douglass with a long white beard. Now I stopped there and I said, because the narrative goes on to talk about what happened on that first Watch Freedom Night. We tell our narrative, we tell our story till it gets to the end. As he poured libations onto the ground, the presence of freedom could be felt throughout the town. You see? And so we go, as the clock began to draw towards 12, the people's cry for freedom began to swell. Freedom, freedom, freedom. So we go on to tell our story. You see, as an old man was asked, what would freedom mean? He replied, no more beating, no more killing, no more that for me. So we have this way. For me, this is what I focus on. Then when I get to the end of the book, they get to the end, everybody say what? Children rose in their beds, no more dreams in their head. Freedom had come at last. As the sun rose and possible lit, the smell of festive foods gave off a pleasant scent. Black-eyed peas, greens, yam, beans, and rice. What a day to celebrate freedom and new life. As men and women celebrated freedom throughout the land, Frederick Douglass knew it would not be our last stand. Many more would suffer, bleed, and die before we would all be free. But for now, this was the beginning of our long road from slavery to liberty. And we now know that the Statue of Liberty was given to us by France. At the bottom of her feet are shackles that represent broken chains of slavery. So then on to the back of the Underground Railroad, not only do you go north, you go to Mexico and you go to Cuba. Then I end by asking children, how many African countries can you name? Where are we from in Africa? Are we from East Africa, South Africa, North, Central, or West? So it's a working textbook, a working book, but it's very profound because what it does, it takes our story and puts it into the narrative of a fairy tale, of a myth. But for me, of course, and I'm getting ready to market more this year. They're $10, and it's as I tell people, when you read it, and it's a very adult book, believe it or not, even though it's not that, because you have to integrate the knowledge of Watch Freedom Night. Now, when we celebrate, and this is what I do, you have symbolism, candles, altars. You have pictures of your, for me, my ancestors who came out of slavery. On that day, what I ask most of us, first of all, before we start talking about Sankofa, meaning to go back, fetching back. You see, what we don't realize is as African men, this is the actual bird whose head is backward with a egg in it and his feet are going forward. But in America, we have what are called the Adinkra. You can look up the word Adinkra, and there are many Adinkra symbols, but this is the Sankofa Adinkra, Adinkra. And I will submit to you that if you look at doors, churches, windows, you've seen this wrought iron symbolism all over the community.
What is the significance of it?
It is the past and the present. It's symbolic. It's Adinkra. Yeah. African men in South Carolina and throughout the New Orleans area who came here were blacksmiths, along with other things. When they put these symbols, like women put symbols in cloth, African men put symbols in iron.
Gotcha.
But no one has known that up until very recently, you see?
Gotcha.
So here's this symbol always been present with us, our Adinkra. I mentioned to you one of these other is creating a group of us Sankofa men going back to our past to move to our future.
So let me ask you this, because we're about halfway through, and there are a couple of other things I want to make sure we do cover. And kind of, we started off with the celebration of Christmas on through the transition into the new year. Most of what we see does not, at least on surface level, include African images of our ancestors, our history. Now, you brought up a lot of things that most people either do not know or do not incorporate. And so when we look at next week going into Christmas, because what we see, Santa Claus, white gentleman with a white beard. We look at other things. Most of them are very European or very Eurocentric, but the foundation and the basis were African. So for those who do want to incorporate African-centered stories and narrative that have been Europeanized, what do you suggest?
Let's go back a minute ago, because I think what I hear from you, and I've said this over, so I have no problem. Please hear what I say. Mm-hmm. What European men, particularly because men are warriors and they conquer and they impose their traditions upon people as they move throughout the country.
That's correct.
That's what war and men do. That's what men in war do.
Gotcha.
Okay. When I say war is not just physical guns or whatever. It's also
psychological.
It's psychological.
Correct. Absolutely.
It's all of that. It's So when I speak as an African man warrior spirit, we shouldn't even be trying to word they. What they do, that's not important. Let them do what they do. Okay. And in terms of the political strife, I know you're talking in terms of what we see in grocery stores and books and TVs. Still, that's their paradigm. That's their control.
Correct. And it is a paradigm that a lot of our people, African people in America, religiously exercise, because that's the only thing that some of them know. And so for those who want to look at something that incorporates their history, their culture into this holiday, what would that look like?
Okay, here again, I'm going back after my reference is not they.
Gotcha.
I'm consistent. My reference is not they.
I understand.
Okay. As an African people now who have come out of a period of slavery, Jim Crow, where we can choose.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
We can choose.
There we go.
And we are choosing tonight as men to have this conversation. Correct. And to present to some people who are listening some options for this season.
There we go.
Or if they want to look at the historical narrative, for an example, first of all, not Santa Claus, but Saint Nicholas, who was a patron saint of the children. That's how we got Santa Claus. He was a patron saint to give of toys and things like that. That's so. In the context of that, there's nothing wrong with that. Children are mysterious creatures. We all are. So we have this. Some suggest they even say Nicholas was a man of color. Some research suggests that. Right. We see black Saint Nicholas Santa Clauses today everywhere. I have them. So it's fine to keep the spirit of giving. Okay. Sometimes it's important. It's very important to bring it in because the word amusement, the holiday becomes an amusing time, and the word amuse means to not think. Like an amusement park, you walk in with a big rat and a big bird. That's why you go you suspend your thought. So a lot of us suspend thought to go into this very mythical fairy tale land of what? Ice and snow and et cetera,
Correct.
And so that's where we are. So it comes out of the northern hemispheric understanding of the winter solstice, et cetera, et cetera. So now that we know that, see, for me, it's important to give the reference points. Gotcha. And we say, now we have this white Jesus, we have this white baby, because now that's important to get from a theological practice, say, okay, is this God in the flesh? Is he being born as a white baby? Are we going to kill God on the cross? Now we get into some deep theological, spiritual things. I, for one, I grew up in it. Now I am not there. Those bookends have fallen. Okay. So as we go into this season, if we want to take this period of the Messiah the birth of the Messiah. If you the word Christmas means Christ Mass in the Catholic tradition, means the Mass of Christ. On December 31st, on December 25th at 12 o'clock, you can turn your TV on. You will see the Christ Mass, the Mass in the St. Peter's Basilica there in Rome. It's there. And they bring in the little white baby and they have the Christmas. All right. Now, so as we say that, you must then shift your spiritual orientation. This is where you must say, do we believe, do I believe, does my family, do the men on this part, other women, do people believe that this little baby is born black or white? Can God be, is that God being born? Eventually for God to be placed on the cross and die at Easter and rise, etc. So with that said, what I push people to do is to understand that, no, that's not that's not God in that manger. You see, that's the Messiah. That's the anointed of Yahweh. Then there are many of us who will call them, but this anointed one, this one who came to confront the Roman powers and to speak truth to power, Isaiah 61, that the Spirit of Yahweh was upon him for his anointing him. He took that same message in Luke 4, and he stood up and read that same passage. He said, this day has this prophecy been filled in your hearing. Then he went out and challenged the Roman government. Subsequently, a number of things happened. So one of the things that we began to do is to redefine our spiritual understanding of this holy season. Okay, to be called holy, if you call it holy season. Okay, so then you take away from this mystery of it, if you will. So what do we replace it with if people choose to? For me, that night of understanding what slavery really meant, so that on that night when our ancestors were still in bondage, these are ship shackles, actual ship shackles, who had come over, slavery abolished in 1808, those who were put into slavery. Many of us have never even heard, touched, or looked at shackles. We don't know what they feel like. Because we don't, we have not gotten in touch with our ancestral past, the energy, the reality that on that night our ancestors were waiting for freedom, literally to wake up, to come out of the cotton fields, literally. But nothing wrong with the cotton. Nothing's wrong with the cotton. It was something wrong with slavery. It was something wrong with getting a 9-foot sack and filling it up with cotton and doing slavery, never getting paid for it, and then doing Jim Crow, only getting 50 cents, 100. Now, just a night to be free. It's a season to be free. The songs that they were singing that relate very closely to the Hebraic tradition. Go down, Moses. Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Then why not deliver for me? Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. We have a direct link to our Hebraic traditions through our songs and through our experience. Many of us, particularly men, have not stopped to even get connected to it. Your generation, this generation who did not grow up under Jim Crow now, who have the freedom to ask these new questions, to explore books and readings and writings, but while at the same time making sure that you build a firm spiritual and cultural foundation on which this generation and future generations can stand, you see. So what we go to your question is, as those who choose, again, I said those who choose.
Correct.
Who say, I want to have a different orientation during this season. This little white baby don't make sense to me. Well, again, I'm not trying to make a white Jesus God into a black Jesus God. Are you with me?
Okay.
Because for me, God is not a physical person who walks around. And plus, God is both male and female in the spirit of imagery. God is a spirit. We should know the truth, and the truth shall make us free, set us free. So now I'm able to. Was not again. I'm not here to do. Yeah, but the point is that as we move away from this male dominant world where we objectify women and abuse them because that's what St. Patrick is about. So as African men, we must begin to understand the El Shaddai, the Almighty One, the all-breasted one, the one with strength and arm as well as comfort and breast. Abraham laid his head in the bosom of God. So there are many things that we as men must begin to dialogue. So that as we go into the season, what can we say during this physical time? It is the time of the birth of the sun. The sun will come back up, S-U-N. The seasons will change. Just as we are closely connected to the harvest, the cotton, I picked the cotton has been picked. The feast, the food, the harvest is in. How many men have worked this year in any garden, any piece of land? That's why I start with men. How many men have worked their land? Now, I don't have any land. Wait a minute, no. You can grow something in a pot. You can grow something in your front yard, your backyard. Do you have land? That's one of the things that breaks any man, any group of men. You detach them from the land, and the land which is feminine. That's why the word husband comes from the word husbandry, Mother Nature. So when we fail to be able to cultivate land to feed our families or grow trees to build our houses, we have lost a great deal of our manhood. The rituals that we see many times, that's why you see in scripture, where men are mostly making sacrifices. So as I say, well, I disagree. Well, I disagree with that, Mr. Stewart. Those I've heard that for 40 years, and it's one of those statements I hear so often. It's one of the things but it's not true, sir. Mhm. Sir, no, 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 no. No,
And we got, and just to set the tone here, we got about 15 minutes in which we
I
also
think, I
have to
think, I
wrap
think,
up.
no,
We
I
also
think,
have to wrap up. Yeah.
no, wait, no, but you have to, no, we don't need to photo. So what you've done, Mr. Stewart, is that we're looking at the fact that, first of all, when you go back to slavery and go to Jim Crow, we start as men. We began to acknowledge those men who struggled, be it during slavery, those who came out during the Union Army with the colored troops, those who came throughout the Jim Crow areas, be it the Civil Rights Movement, be it the Civil Rights Movement, be it the Black Panthers, be it Stokely, Kwame Ture, people, those I knew them. And as you get into this era, but sir, again, no, again, your exaggeration and your need to emphasize it. Because warriorship, as I said, in Ghana, in many ways in Africa, where you have the queen mothers and you have the men who create war, call upon the Shantahini, the men make the king, particularly who knows how to fight, who knows how to build land, to grow food, to build houses, etc. But it's the queen mothers who must make the final decision on who the king is, because he cannot be so hard that he cannot be have wisdom, and wisdom is a feminine energy.
Let me ask you this.
Wait a minute. And so then the queen mothers make that selection, so there's balance. In the Kemetic tradition, we call it ma'at. Okay. And so Mrs. Stewart, I spoke to the group at over at the school in South Dallas there on Martin Luther King. I told them years ago, and I heard you just say the kings and queens, and everybody said we were kings and queens. Everybody was not a king and queen in Africa. No, you can be kingly or queenly in your behavior, but that was a misnomer, sir. And it has gone around out for the last 50 years, 40 years. We all, we were not all kings. We could be kingly. Now, what we must do is that we must identify those people within our culture, sir, who have made the contributions, because you and I, we are here tonight.
Mm.
We are here tonight because of the contributions of men and women, and we must take the time and identify them. They have been there, and they are there, and where we are going right now in terms of how we now have integrated into this larger society, and what those elements have done to as Mr. Duncan and I talked about earlier,
Yeah.
the issue of integration versus
Right.
desegregation. Those are
Right.
very important topics. But I cannot, as a historian, sit here and say that we are sitting here because of historical milestones as rather and people's sacrifices.
Right.
Now, what happens?
Wait, time out.
Now, what happens, sir, is that tonight,
Wait a second.
out of the audience.
I have to interject. I apologize, Jimmy. Someone, your microphone isn't coming through, so some of our audience cannot hear you. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So if you could check and make sure. I don't know if it's on mute, but a couple of folks said they could not hear you. And I do apologize, Professor. I just wanted to make sure because you guys were having a dialogue there. All right, go ahead, sir.
So what happens, sir, tonight, let me just say, here I am after I've done this, like I said, at least 40 years. I know thousands of people like I've talked with you all tonight, Mr. Stewart, over the years. You cannot begin with and say and speak about what are we doing now? Who are the people here tonight? This is a conversation. You impact people who are calling to a macro. Let's focus on the micro tonight. We're talking about what options. I'm talking about this season to be free. How do we construct an environment during this season? Not only for those who want to do Christmas or Kwanzaa, that's fine. But whoever wants to have an alternative to that, yes, get your candle on December 31st. You light it. Sing the songs of our ancestors. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamp trimmed and burning. Okay. The time is almost nigh. There are songs that that I know from my ancestors that I must pass on to you all. The traditions. And that represented that night of freedom. Let it burn all night to the next morning of Emancipation Day. Sit your children down, and when you're going to make black eyed peas, let them know it came from Africa. If you're going to cook collard greens, let them know it came from Africa. Right. Let them know the hopping John, whatever you do. There are ways to create. When you begin to look at, say, well, we're not going to spend the money here, but what we're going to make this gift today, you see? Or we're going to get grandmothers this or that. Create an action. We're talking about have an action on December 31st. Freedman Cemetery. 12 o'clock. Be there. Do we know what Freedman Cemetery in Dallas is? Do you know what Central and Lemon and Hall Street? These are action steps that you begin to say, I'm going to go to the Freedman Cemetery on January the 1st. Pay my respect to our ancestors, our elders. Take my children there. I'm going to the African American Museum and go walk through the Freedman exhibit. These are action points. Well, who are these men and women who made these things happen? Not only talk about Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, all these people, who are the ones in Dallas? This is your city.
And why do we do this? And why do we do this? Because we are coming to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure that we can succinctly summarize these items, actions, options for our listeners who are live tonight, who will be listening to this show afterwards, so they can say, hey, everybody may have a different lane, right. And we understand that everybody may not have the same lane, but you brought up a couple of things in terms of action items that we can take away from instilling our history, our culture, and our story and our future into this season. So you talked about Freedman Cemetery. Briefly, tell us about that and what's going to happen for those who might be interested. That's number one. Number two, you mentioned the book a little bit earlier. I have a couple of folks who've asked how you can get the book. I think you said It costs $10. What is the name of the book? And just so for those who want to purchase that book, how do they do that? You can get that information. We can put that in the chat line, and you can just tell us now. And then maybe a couple of more things, action items we can take away right now that we can start incorporating.
Well, first of all, again, action item number one, Professor Clarence Glover, my phone number is 214-546-3480, 214-546-3480. My email is Clarence Glover Jr. at AOL.com, Clarence Glover Jr., JR, no period, at AOL.com. So you have my phone number and my email. I'm learning how to do all this new stuff. It's social media. I'm not big on it yet. I don't
That's
have
to
a
get the
PayPal.
book. Is that to get the book, or when you say your phone number and your email?
I'm giving you information so you can contact me. Yes.
Okay, to get the book.
To
So,
get the book. Yes.
so
Okay,
Tom, send me
now
the information. I'll put it
No.
in our description on the video.
will do.
Okay.
Now
Second thing, go ahead.
the Freedman Cemetery is located on Lemon and Hall Street near the Walmart on Lemon and Hall. Freedman Cemetery is there. I will be there on January the 1st at noon. I
Is
go
it a
there.
ceremony, or tell us a little bit about what?
I go there regularly. It's a place I go. For me, every time I go there, it's ceremony.
Okay.
Yeah. See, this, again, I'm trying to say to us, we must begin to do all things in a religious manner. Take our families and our children to be in those spaces and places.
Right.
I'm saying tonight that if you come on January the 1st
At noon,
I'll be able to speak with you. I'll have coloring books, etc. Bring your families and friends there. I will give you a tour of the cemetery and the history there. Particularly if you're from Dallas, you should come because chances are you may have a descendant. Then you can go to the African American Museum where there are names upstairs in the Freeman of the Rising Sun exhibit. And there are many names up there who are buried in the cemetery. You may see your family's name up there, someone you may know. That's at the African American Museum in Fair Park.
yeah, absolutely, perfect. Because I mean, quite frankly, we know that there are a lot of folks, who've never been there, including myself, from Dallas. But it is what it is, and so we want to take what we learn now and move forward. Books that folks may be interested in learning about some of the things that you spoke to earlier that built the narrative around what we celebrate during this holiday. You talked about the Council of Nicaea. You talked about several different historical figures so that people can become informed and armed so that they understand what we're doing and why. Any books?
First of all, I would say simply start with one book, first of all.
Okay.
Well, first of all, there are two books. The book I taught from at SMU was one of the main books was They Came Before the Mayflower by LaRon Bennett.
Yep.
But the book that's out now, that is one second, is entitled 1619. It is at Pan African Bookstore. 1619.
Okay.
You all know what 1619, from 1619 to 2019 was the 400-year recognition here in America. I just shared this tonight. This happens to be, there were 400 people recognized by the federal government, by the Federal Commission in America, 400 people who they perceived to have been keeping our story alive. I was selected as one of the 400. And this is the award I was given. Thank you. This is the award I was given.
Outstanding.
As a result of the New York Times project called 1619. There is a book now called 1619. She read LaRon Bennett's book. It has several other things. You may not find LaRon Bennett's book right now very easily, but you can find her book, the book called 1619. And there's a children's book and an adult book at Pan African Bookstore in Marsalis in Glendale Shopping Center. 1619, Sister Quete and others know me there. So I would say get the 1619 book. It incorporates a lot of information, but you can also get Before the Mayflower, and you can go online and order Before the Mayflower by LaRon Bennett.
And that would also speak to a lot of what you were talking to earlier today, considering the foundation of what we are now celebrating during the Christmas holiday, correct?
Well, it gives you the history of the African American experience. Now,
yes,
when you start getting into the other things like the Council of Nicaea, you start getting there are various books in terms of they came before the stolen legacy, and these are books that people read for the stolen legacy of the structure of Black civilization. Yes, all those. But then again, these are books that need to be, and I've said over the years, need to be processed properly. People read a book, and then they become authorities, and they go out and they begin to try and take grandmama's picture down. Again, I do not advocate for that, nor I encourage it. But if we're about serious scholarship, about serious thinking and processing, and if we're engaging in what I call the 3 R's: reconstruction, reevaluation, and redirection. That's part of my work. The new 3 R's: We reconstruct the past, we reevaluate where we are in it, and then we redirect our future. You see, that's Sankofa. We make those choices. So these choices we make tonight will influence our steps tomorrow. And I want to say to the audience that is listening, again, both as an educator, historian, but also as a minister, one of the things that's missing in Dallas is that spiritual place that calls us into these seasons. And First African Freedom Church, because everybody debates their faith, and this is not about a debate, but wherever you are, but you should be somewhere and find fellowship with other people so that you can have something to pass to your children and your children's children. And
Okay.
that's so critical.
And so, Professor, we're at the top of the hour now, and we normally close. Well, not normal. We close our show out with a prayer from our brother Tommy. But we were wondering if maybe you would do the honors this time
Absolutely.
and close us out with a prayer.
Well, certainly, certainly. Father, Mother God, we give you thanks for this evening, for the opportunity to come before your holy presence as we coming to the season of creation, of time and energy, of sun, light, and darkness that you have created on this earth that is yours. We realize that your creation of all colors and sorts have evolved into become beings that have different traditions and rituals. And we who are your people, we have always had tradition and rituals that have come out of the land of Mother Africa, which is the home of all humanity. We know that we have gone through the trials and tribulations of slavery and Jim Crow and civil rights, and here we are today, still yet proclaiming your holy and righteous name. Hallelujah. All praises to Yah. We come tonight thanking you for our ancestors, our elders, those who came, who harmed the ships on with John Newton to give forth amazing grace. How sweet the sound that has saved thousands and millions of men and women. We thank you for the drum beats of the Church of God in Christ that beat rhythms of hallelujah and shouts in backwoods. We thank you for those who prayed in wooden churches on plantations. We thank you for those who walked the streets of Mississippi, Alabama, those who picked the cotton in and out of school during the season or could not go until all the cotton was out. We thank you for those who fought during the civil rights movement, those who stood for righteousness and justice, those who have brought this nation to its moral reality. We thank you for Martin and Malcolm. We thank you for Harry and Sojourner. We thank you for our mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers and grandfathers whose names some of us don't call. Forgive us for the fact that we don't even know their names. Forgive us that we don't know who our ancestors are, those who were in slavery. Help us to begin to remember, for only in remembering can we move forward. We come now realizing that all these times and seasons, these festivals are yours, so they should remind us of you. And as men, we come tonight asking for forgiveness, for we have oftentimes allowed our personal and selfish egos to stand in the way of humbling ourselves, so we lay our lives on the altar. Just as Yahshua the Messiah came to understand that he must give of himself, we give of ourselves tonight to you. And we thank you for these brothers who have given forth this program that we might be able to speak these truths through you and to others. And now we ask that you will keep us in your presence, in your spirit. And we pray for Yahshua the Messiah, our teacher, our rabbi, our Messiah, our liberator. In your holy name we pray. Ashe, amen.
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 All right.
Thank you very much, sir. And I believe, Jimmy, that closes us out for the night, correct?
That closes out for the night. Great show. We're now just streaming our exit song and music, and so the stream will stop here.